Welcome back to the Way of Hermes, where we explore the profound wisdom of Hermetic philosophy. Today, we're diving into a fascinating concept that lies at the heart of Hermeticism, the oneness of God. Emily, can you give our listeners a brief introduction to this idea?
The concept of the oneness of God is a cornerstone of Hermetic thought, found throughout the Corpus Hermeticum and the Asclepius. It's the idea that all of existence, in its infinite variety, stems from and is ultimately united in a single divine source.
That's quite a profound concept. How does this idea of oneness manifest in Hermetic texts?
Well, there's a beautiful quote from the Corpus Hermeticum that captures this essence perfectly. It states, "He being all things is the one, and being one is all things. The totality of everything is one and is in one." This reflects a monistic philosophy where all apparent dualities and multiplicities are seen as interconnected and emanating from this single divine source.
It sounds like this concept goes beyond just a theological idea and touches on the nature of reality itself. But Emily, I'm curious, how does this idea of oneness reconcile with the mention of multiple gods in some Hermetic texts?
That's an excellent question, Jake. This is where we see elements of henotheism in Hermetic thought. Henotheism is the belief in and worship of one supreme God, without denying the existence or possible worship of other divine entities.
So it's not strictly monotheistic then?
Not in the way we typically think of monotheism, no. The Hermetica acknowledges a supreme God as the ultimate source, but it also recognizes other divine beings or powers. These are often described as instruments of the supreme God. There's a passage in the Corpus Hermeticum that illustrates this beautifully, saying, "His spiritual substance governs the heavens govern the gods, and the powers which are appointed by the gods govern men."
That's intriguing. It seems to suggest a kind of divine hierarchy, with everything ultimately stemming from the one. But how does this concept of oneness impact the individual's spiritual journey in Hermeticism?
That's where it gets really interesting, Jake. In Hermetic thought, the journey towards understanding this divine oneness is deeply personal and transformative. It's about recognizing the divine nature within oneself and in all things. This realization is often referred to as gnosis, or divine knowledge.
So it's not just an abstract concept, but something to be experienced.
Exactly. The Hermetica encourages an inward journey of self-discovery and enlightenment. By realizing the divine nature of the mind, individuals can transcend their limited perceptions and attain a higher state of consciousness. It's a path of personal spiritual growth that aims to bring one into harmony with the divine oneness.
It seems like this concept has some significant philosophical and ethical implications as well. Can you elaborate on that?
The idea of oneness in Hermeticism provides a foundation for ethics and morality. Since all beings are interconnected through the divine, harming another is essentially harming oneself. This interconnectedness fosters a sense of universal compassion and responsibility.
Emily, as we wrap up this part of our discussion, could you summarize why this concept of oneness is so central to Hermetic philosophy?
The concept of oneness in Hermeticism is fundamental because it offers a profound vision of unity that transcends all apparent divisions. It provides a framework for understanding the nature of reality, the divine, and our place within it. This perspective encourages a holistic approach to life, fostering spiritual growth, ethical living, and a deeper connection with the cosmos.
Can you elaborate on how the Hermetic concept of divine oneness compares to ideas in Neoplatonism, Advaita Vedanta, and Christian mysticism?
Certainly, Jake. The Hermetic concept of divine oneness shares remarkable similarities with these traditions, highlighting its syncretic nature. In Neoplatonism, for instance, we find the concept of the One as the ultimate, ineffable source of all existence. This closely mirrors the Hermetic understanding of God as the supreme, all-encompassing reality.
That's interesting. How about Advaita Vedanta? I've heard it also emphasizes a kind of ultimate unity.
You're right, Jake. In Advaita Vedanta, there's the concept of Brahman, the ultimate, unchanging reality. The idea that all is Brahman strongly resonates with the Hermetic notion that all things are interconnected and emanate from a single divine source. Both traditions emphasize the illusory nature of separation and the underlying unity of all existence.
And what about Christian mysticism? It seems like it might be quite different, given Christianity's typically more personal conception of God.
While mainstream Christianity often emphasizes a personal God, Christian mysticism, particularly in figures like Meister Eckhart and the Desert Fathers, explores themes of unity and oneness with the divine that are remarkably similar to Hermetic ideas. Eckhart, for example, spoke of the ground of being where the soul and God are one, which echoes the Hermetic emphasis on recognizing the divine within oneself.
It's fascinating to see these connections across such diverse traditions. What do you think this says about the Hermetic tradition itself?
I think it underscores the syncretic nature of Hermetic thought, Jake. The Hermetica blends elements from Greek, Egyptian, and other ancient traditions, creating a unique philosophical tapestry. This syncretic approach allows Hermeticism to serve as a bridge between different mystical and religious traditions, highlighting the universality of the concept of divine oneness.
It seems like this concept of oneness isn't just a theological idea, but has some profound philosophical implications as well. Can you expand on that?
The Hermetic concept of oneness carries significant philosophical weight. For one, it suggests that true knowledge or gnosis involves recognizing the unity underlying apparent diversity. This has epistemological implications, suggesting that ultimate truth is found in understanding the interconnectedness of all things.
How does this idea impact Hermetic views on ethics and morality?
Well, Jake, the concept of oneness provides a strong foundation for Hermetic ethics. If all beings are interconnected through the divine, then harming another is essentially harming oneself. This fosters a sense of universal compassion and responsibility. There's a beautiful quote from the Corpus Hermeticum that illustrates this. Since the Creator made the whole cosmos, not with hands but by logos, understand that He is present and always is, creating all things, being one alone and by His will producing all beings.
That's a powerful perspective. It seems to encourage a very holistic approach to life and ethics.
Exactly, Jake. This holistic view extends to how we understand ourselves and our place in the cosmos. The Hermetic texts often emphasize that by realizing the divine nature within ourselves, we can transcend our limited perceptions and attain a higher state of consciousness. It's a philosophy that invites us to see beyond superficial differences and recognize the underlying unity in all things.
This discussion has really highlighted the depth and richness of Hermetic philosophy. As we move forward, I'm curious to explore how these profound ideas can be applied in our daily lives. But before we do that, is there anything else you'd like to add about the philosophical and comparative aspects of Hermetic oneness?
One important aspect we haven't touched on yet, Jake, is how the Hermetic view of divine instruments and intermediaries relates to this concept of oneness. It's a fascinating nuance in Hermetic thought.
Can you elaborate on how these divine instruments fit into the Hermetic understanding of oneness?
In Hermetic philosophy, God is seen as acting both directly and through intermediaries. These intermediaries, which can be thought of as divine instruments, are not separate from God, but are manifestations of divine action in the world.
So these intermediaries aren't independent entities, but rather extensions of the divine.
Exactly, Jake. The Hermetica teaches that while God sometimes acts without an intermediary, He also acts through instruments. However, it's crucial to understand that even when God acts through an intermediary, the act ultimately belongs to God alone.
How does this relate to the concept of the cosmos in Hermetic thought?
Well, in Hermetic philosophy, the cosmos itself is seen as the creative and formative act of God. It's not something separate from God, but rather a manifestation of divine creativity. The Hermetica suggests that the cosmos has no autonomous reality and exists only through the one God who accomplishes it.
So, in essence, everything we perceive as the universe is really just an expression of divine action.
That's right, Jake. This view reinforces the concept of oneness by emphasizing that even apparent multiplicity and diversity are ultimately expressions of the one. It's a profound way of understanding the relationship between the divine and the manifest world.
it seems to add another layer to our understanding of Hermetic oneness. How does this view of divine instruments and the cosmos as God's creative act influence Hermetic approaches to worship and reverence?
That's an excellent question, Jake. The Hermetic approach to worship is quite unique and directly relates to this understanding of oneness and divine action. Unlike many religious traditions that focus on external rituals, Hermeticism emphasizes internal reverence and piety.
Can you give us an example of how this internal focus is described in Hermetic texts?
In the Asclepius, one of the key Hermetic texts, we find this quote, "Because of this man is united to the gods in kinship, and he therefore worships them through religion and through purity of mind." This suggests that true worship is about cultivating a spiritual disposition of awe and respect for the divine, rather than engaging in specific external practices.
That's quite different from many traditional religious approaches. How else is this internal focus on worship expressed in Hermetic thought?
The Corpus Hermeticum also emphasizes this internal approach. It states, "Impiety is mankind's greatest offense against the gods, for the gods' work is to do good, men's to show piety, and for the spiritual powers to serve." Here, piety is presented as an internal state rather than an external practice, aligning with the Hermetic emphasis on inner transformation and the pursuit of gnosis, or divine knowledge.
It sounds like this approach to worship really reinforces the Hermetic focus on personal spiritual growth and inner enlightenment.
This inward journey towards understanding the divine essence within oneself and the universe is at the heart of Hermetic practice. It's about recognizing and aligning with the oneness that permeates all existence, rather than performing outward rituals or ceremonies.
This internal focus on worship in Hermeticism is fascinating. How does this approach relate to the concept of henotheism we discussed earlier?
That's an excellent connection to make, Jake. The Hermetic approach to worship, with its emphasis on internal reverence, actually aligns quite well with the henotheistic elements we find in the texts. Remember, henotheism acknowledges a supreme God while recognizing the existence of other divine beings.
Right, I recall that. So how does this play out in terms of worship?
Well, in the Hermetic view, while there's an acknowledgement of various divine powers or gods, the ultimate focus is on the supreme, all-encompassing one. The Corpus Hermeticum provides a great example of this. It states, "His spiritual substance governs the heavens govern the gods, and the powers which are appointed by the gods govern men." This is the host of gods and powers.
So it's like a divine hierarchy, with everything ultimately stemming from the one.
And this understanding influences how Hermeticists approach worship. Instead of focusing on rituals dedicated to specific deities, the emphasis is on cultivating a state of mind that recognizes the underlying unity of all divine manifestations.
It seems like this approach would require a lot of personal reflection and inner work.
It's very much about an individual's journey towards understanding and experiencing the divine unity. The Hermetica encourages practitioners to look within themselves to find the divine spark that connects them to the one.
Emily, this reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about the cosmos being seen as God's creative act. How does this idea fit into the Hermetic approach to worship and reverence?
Great observation, Jake. The Hermetic view of the cosmos as creative act actually deepens the significance of internal reverence. If we understand the entire universe as a manifestation of divine creativity, then cultivating awareness and appreciation of this becomes a form of worship in itself.
So in a sense, by recognizing the divine in all things, one is constantly engaged in a form of worship.
Precisely. This perspective encourages a state of continuous reverence and awe towards existence itself. It's not about setting aside specific times for worship, but rather maintaining a constant awareness of the divine presence in all aspects of life.
It seems like it would have a significant impact on how one lives their daily life.
This Hermetic approach to worship and reverence isn't just a theological concept, it's a way of life. It encourages individuals to see the sacred in the mundane, to recognize the interconnectedness of all things, and to approach life with a sense of wonder and respect.
Emily, as we explore these deep concepts, I'm curious about how Hermeticism suggests one can cultivate this state of continuous reverence. Are there specific practices or meditations mentioned in the texts?
One notable example is the Holy Trisagion, found in the Corpus Hermeticum. The Holy Trisagion is a powerful contemplative practice that aligns with the Hermetic understanding of divine unity. This repetition is meant to help the practitioner attune their mind to the different aspects of the divine while recognizing their essential unity.
I see. So it's a way of experiencing the multiple aspects of divinity while still maintaining the awareness of their fundamental oneness.
Exactly, Jake. It's a practical application of the henotheistic perspective we discussed earlier. By meditating on these different divine attributes, the practitioner is reminded of the multifaceted nature of the divine, while simultaneously reinforcing the understanding that all these aspects stem from and are united in the One.
Are there other meditative practices mentioned in the Hermetic texts?
Another significant practice is the prayer of thanksgiving, found in the Asclepius. This prayer is a beautiful expression of gratitude and reverence for the divine. It's not just a recitation, but a contemplative exercise designed to align one's consciousness with the divine reality.
How does this prayer of thanksgiving relate to the Hermetic concept of oneness?
The prayer of thanksgiving is deeply connected to the concept of oneness. It expresses gratitude not just to a distant deity, but to the divine presence that permeates all of existence. By engaging in this prayer, the practitioner is acknowledging the divine unity underlying all of creation, including themselves.
It seems like these practices are really about shifting one's perception and consciousness rather than performing external rituals.
That's a great observation, Jake. In Hermeticism, the focus is indeed on inner transformation. These practices are tools for altering one's state of consciousness, allowing the practitioner to perceive and experience the divine unity directly. It's about cultivating a state of mind where one can recognize the sacred in every aspect of life.
This approach to spirituality seems quite different from many traditional religious practices. How do you think this Hermetic perspective might be relevant or beneficial in our modern world?
In our fast-paced, often fragmented modern world, the Hermetic emphasis on recognizing the underlying unity of all things can be incredibly valuable. It offers a way to find meaning and connection in everyday life, promoting a sense of reverence for the world around us and for our own inner experiences.
I can see how that could be beneficial. It sounds like it could lead to a greater sense of environmental stewardship and interpersonal compassion.
Absolutely, Jake. When we truly internalize the idea that everything is interconnected and part of a divine unity, it naturally fosters a sense of responsibility towards our environment and empathy towards others. It's a perspective that encourages us to see the sacred in all aspects of life, from the grandeur of nature to our daily interactions with others.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Hermetic Dialogues, the official podcast of the Way of Hermes website. If you are interested in free articles on Hermeticism and related topics or want to study this ancient tradition through our online course, be sure to visit our website at wayofhermes.com.